some of the hard economic realities and the realities of choices made in the past are starting to bite, and questions are and should be being asked about the UK's level of capability. And they're also being asked within the UK. That's why we see the Ministry of Defence pushing for more money.
Now, are our NATO allies having doubts about the UK's military readiness? NATO bosses are said to be concerned that the UK's military is not strong enough to take on Russia in an armed conflict, and have asked Germany to remain in charge for an extra year because Britain supposedly cannot spare the 5,000 personnel required. The Secretary-General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, will be speaking later today, and NATO defence ministers will meet this week. So is there serious concern about our military capabilities? And at the same time, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is pushing hard for extra defence spending. In a moment, we'll speak to Tobias Ellwood, the chairman of the Defence Select Committee. First, let's get a sense of the German perspective from Benjamin Tallis, research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Relations and a NATO expert. Good morning.
Hello, Lucy, and good morning from Berlin.
Now, Benjamin, is Germany, a NATO ally, seriously doubting Britain's military capability?
Well, first off, just to address the specific report that I think you're referring to, I've seen no evidence here of people preparing to take on that extra year in charge of the Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, the VJTF, which is what is supposedly in question. So that report is very much unconfirmed at the moment. But where there is deeper underlying concern is indeed about the UK's military capabilities. And that might seem strange to some because the UK has been at the forefront of providing support, especially military support, to Ukraine. But some of the hard economic realities and the realities of choices made in the past are starting to bite, and questions are and should be being asked about the UK's level of capability. And they're also being asked within the UK. That's why we see the Ministry of Defence pushing for more money.
That's interesting. So let's just be crystal clear then. You said there's no evidence that this report in the German press that Britain isn't able to spare 5,000 troops to lead this very high readiness joint task force, as you say, it's called the VJTF. I've also been messaged by a senior government source this morning saying that those reports in the German press are nonsense. So it sounds like from your perspective, you don't think there's any credibility either?
No, as I say, I think there's credibility to the underlying concern about Britain's ability to field and deploy relevant capabilities, as well as about its capability profile more widely and what that contributes to NATO. But in terms of this specific report, I've certainly not been able to confirm it with sources here. And it doesn't seem to me as though the German leadership would be preparing to take on an extra year. So I'm not quite sure where this comes from.
So let's talk about the weakness in the deeper capability that you mentioned in the UK. What is Germany's view of where the UK needs to invest more in its armed forces and materiel?
Well, it wouldn't just be Germany's view. I mean, the UK's capability issues are quite widely known and quite readily apparent. And we've seen it even in the places where the UK has taken the lead in providing support to Ukraine. So the UK was one of the front runners on providing tanks and committing to providing tanks. But this raised the debate about the UK's Challenger force. Of course, 2/3 of that force is due to be upgraded to the Challenger 3 specification by a German-British joint venture, incidentally. But the question of how many tanks the UK actually needs and what kind of fighting the UK actually intends to do, or what kind of commitments Britain wants to make in the world, have come up, because it's not certain that that's enough, and it's not certain that actually the force profile is right to meet the UK's ambitions, let alone its commitments. Same thing with the fighter jets, that Rishi Sunak has been keen to be out front in saying we'll explore options for how to provide fighter jets to Ukraine. But that's raised objections from experts and from military sources, saying it would undermine the UK's Typhoon force, which is where any jets would potentially come from. Mm-hmm. So there's big questions there about the past choices that the UK has made in investing in defence, the choice to invest in these aircraft carriers, for example, the carrier strike groups that have garnered significant media attention and publicity, but do they actually do what the UK needs in terms of contributing to NATO and contributing to the victory of democracies over autocracies in the world?
Benjamin Tallis, thank you. Let's move now to speak to Tobias Ellwood, the Tory chairman of the Defence Select Committee. Good morning, Tobias.
Good morning.
So Benjamin Tallis didn't think that there was much credibility in this German press report. I'm hearing from government sources that it's nonsense. What do you make of it?
I would agree with that. I think we are very capable of taking on our NATO responsibilities. But as Benjamin was talking there is a wider issue about our general defense posture, which I know concerns the Secretary of State, Ben Wallace. I know he would like to see a larger armed force because it's constituted over the last 30 years since the Cold War. The question I pose, or posed many times, in fact, to prime ministers, defense secretaries, military leaders, is will the world be more safer or more dangerous in 5 years' time? I asked that question before Ukraine, and everybody agreed that the world, was deteriorating from a threat perspective. Authoritarianism is on the rise. International institutions can't hold errant state and nations to account. There's a lack of clarity also as to what the actual West stands for, what we believe in, what we're really willing to defend, particularly after Afghanistan. So no wonder the head of the British Army was comparing our world today to 1937. Unfortunately, we remain on a peacetime budget, and that's exactly what I think concerns people like myself, and indeed, I would fair to say, the Defense Secretary too. Back in 1990, we had 36 fast jet squadrons. Today, we only have 7. We had 900 main battle tanks. We're cutting that down to 148. We had over 50 frigates and destroyers, and now we're only up to 18. And of course, we then had those sweeping cuts in the last defense budget, including 10,000 personnel, which has raised concerns right across the board. Essentially, we're still in peacetime mode, and we moved into another Cold War on 2 fronts. The world is certainly getting more dangerous, and we're not quite ready yet.
So you say we have a peacetime budget, the MOD is in peacetime mode. We read in the Times today that Ben Wallace is pushing for up to 11 billion increase in the Ministry of Defence's budget. That would be an uplift of a fifth. Do you think that it's realistic that he'll get anywhere near like that? And what's the minimum extra cash that the Ministry of Defence really needs to get in the budget next month in order to meet the challenges that you outline?
Well, the defense sector is in a very invidious position. That 10 billion or so is simply to flatline. It's simply to make sure that we can pay for the inflationary hit, the extra cost of fuel, for example, the foreign exchange problems, and to maintain our current equipment. This isn't even to advance some of those issues that I've just actually mentioned. The purpose of defense review is to confirm the current and future threats. And the last review did that very well indeed. It said that we were vulnerable in the areas of space and cyber, but the consequence of pouring money into that came to the detriment of the 3 services. And we need to, I think, better sell the fact that there is a symbiotic relationship between our economy and indeed our security. If you drop your security, I'm afraid errant nations will take advantage of that, take advantage of our timidity. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Ukraine. If Ukraine war hadn't taken place, if the conflict Russia hadn't invaded, inflation would be at 4% GDP. Now, if that's 4%, that would be a lot easier to negotiate with the public sectors and the pay reviews than it would be where we are today. So we need to better clarify why it helps all of Britain to make sure that we have stronger defense. Otherwise, all government departments will have less money because our prosperity will be challenged.
We've been talking about Ukraine, the focus of our chat so far. Just switching to China, Ben Wallace has announced the UK will conduct a security review after a series of objects suspected of being Chinese spy balloons have been shot down over North America in recent days. How concerned are you about these spy balloons?
Very concerned, but it isn't just this. I think this is a testament as to where China is going. It's interpreting our wobbly international rules-based order to its own benefit. It's exploiting the West's weakness. It's joining together with Russia quietly to try and weaken the West, to weaken the United States in particular, so it can thrive itself. That's the new economic battlefield that we now see. And we need to recognize that we've become reliant on China in so many ways, to the point now whereby if you want to upgrade a military bit of capability, perhaps we can't do that because we can't get those individual parts from China. So I hope this is like a Sputnik moment, if you like, in 1957, where people are going to look up and say, my goodness, look at where China is going. If they're this aggressive today, where will they be in 10 years' time? And are we ready for it? And I think the answer to that right now is no, we're not.
A staunch warning there from Tobias Ellwood, the Tory chairman of the Defence Select Committee.